Hey everyone! Some of you may know that when I was around 14 or 15 years old, back in the days of Halo 3, Halo Reach and maybe a little bit of Halo 4 as well, I was obsessed with the Forge mode. I loved making maps and game types for my friends to play, from big palaces just there because they supposedly looked good, to deadly minigames, to my personal favorite, puzzle maps. I made a lot of puzzle maps back in the days, and in a lot of cases I even held small competitions among a group of friends and players that I had met throughout the years to see who could beat them first. Now my first maps that I made on Halo 3 were only played by a few players and had all kinds of issues that allowed players to go out of the map or beat the maps in unintended ways. They were messy to say the least, but I still had fun making them. However, by the time that Halo Reach came out, I had gotten quite a bit better at making these maps. And also, the Forge feature was much better in Halo Reach, which opened up so much more options.
Phase is the coolest because it means that while you're editing the object, it's not actually interacting with the environment. You can put it through a wall, you can put it, through other objects.
After the game came out, it didn't take me too long to build the map that I called Marco's Prison. Yes, with a Z, because that was cool back then. Or at least I thought it was. Either way, I made this map, and it was a two-player co-op puzzle map, where you have to work together to escape a prison that basically you spawn in. Now, because I was really proud of this map and I wanted a lot of players to play it, I would up the stakes a little bit. I would have another one of these competitions, and I would give 1600 Microsoft points to the team that beat it first. Surely, with such a large prize pool and with so much on the line, everybody that I knew would probably give this a go. And most of them did. But to my surprise, and also a little bit to my disappointment, no one ever beat the map, and very few players even came past the first room, or the second room. This was a bit strange to me, because when creating the map, I was on purposely avoiding anything that requires a lot of mechanical skill to execute. A lot of puzzle maps back in the day always felt more like obstacle courses or jumping courses, where you don't really have to figure out what to do. Usually you just have to jump to the next platform, but you just have to be able to do it. Now, of course, this wasn't always the case. I remember seeing some really good puzzle maps, like I think it was called Poseidon's Lair, which also relied mostly on having the player figure out what to do instead of trying to do it. In fact, I totally stole the checkpoint system that guy created in his map and put it in my own puzzle maps. I did that a lot. I looked at a lot of different maps that a lot of different players made, and if I saw something that I liked, I usually just took it for myself and started implementing that in my maps as well. Hey, it's not stealing if no one ever finds out. Anyway, point being, the map that I made was not an obstacle course or a jumping map. I maybe had one or two jumps that were somewhat challenging, even though my own brother, who had never played a Halo game before, managed to do these successfully on the second try. So I wouldn't really say that was the difficult part about my map. And the whole map only had 5 rooms, 5 puzzles that you basically had to beat. And yet, no one beat it. So I just used the Microsoft points to change my name a whole bunch of times and try to come up with an even edgier name. That's how I got the name MarcoStyle, by the way. What a bad decision that was. Now, I don't really know why, but last week I thought it would be a cool video idea to finally go back to the map and try to beat it myself if I remembered how to do it, together with my brother. And then use that to explain how all of these different puzzles were made using some obscure game mechanics that you probably didn't really know about, even though you played Halo yourself. So that's basically what this is. So let's start off with room 1, which is a fairly easy room. The difficulty ramps up as you get further into the map, and with room 1 being the first room, obviously it's going to be the easiest. And you could probably beat this in about 30 seconds if you know what to do. Before I start though, some basic information. The game mode that you have to play this map with is a capture the flag variant. Although the flag mechanic is not really too relevant. What is important is that you need to have one player on the blue team and one player on the red team. You need to be on opposite teams for this map to work, and you'll see why soon enough. So, once you spawn in, players start off each in their own prison cell, but oh, we're out of luck because the prison is destroyed. I kind of had this narrative of the prison, I don't know, being under attack or something, and then rocks just falling down on top of the prison. So a lot of the prison stuff that you'll see in this map is broken. So the blue player is out of luck here because his cell has been completely blocked off by giant rocks. And the red player, meanwhile, well, his cell is still intact, but there isn't much in it. All that we have is a couple of shafts. One is too tight to get under, even when you're crouching, and the other two are too high, even for a crouch jump. There's also this other little room with an evade power-up, which is an ability that lets your Spartan dash, for those that didn't play Halo. But you can't get into it, because the door is blocked with explosives and a shield to prevent you from shooting the explosives. So, how do we beat this room? Well, first up, the red player needs to kill the blue player so he can respawn in the red player cell. There's no bullet penetration in Halo, but the glass in between the cells is thin enough for a player's weapon to clip through. And in Halo, as long as you can shoot somebody's weapon, you will also damage the player. So all the blue player has to do is stand close enough to the glass and let the red player kill him. Now once you're both inside the same cell, you can boost each other up on top of the vents that you couldn't reach alone. It doesn't matter which one you go through, because both will lead you to a camping stool, which can be pushed out. The camping stool is then used to block one of the spawns in the cell. You see, each spawn point in this cell is indicated by this little flag post. And in Halo, if there's even the tiniest object close to a spawn point, the game will think that there isn't enough space to put the player there. So, if you push the camping stool on top of one of the spawn points and have your friend stand on the other spawn point while killing you, where do you spawn? Well, in the little room with the evade power-up, because there's also a flag post there, which you can see through the glass, and that should be an indicator that, hey, there's a spawn point there as well. The reason a player only spawns here when the other two spawns are blocked is because of spawning prioritization. In the Forge mode, you can set a priority from 1 to 9 on any spawn point, and then the game will always spawn you on a spawn point with the highest available priority. Since with the camping stool we're blocking off those higher priority spawn points, we will now spawn on the lower priority spawn point, which is in the room right next to it. The player can then destroy the explosives and grab the evade. However, the shield that prevented you from destroying the explosives from the outside is a one-way shield. So yeah, you got in, but you still cannot get out. Not in a normal way at least. What you have to do from here is have one player stand in front of the shield with his back towards the shield, so that the other guy can run into the shield and through the shield perform an assassination, which will clip him through and then also set him free once the animation ends. And with the evade, the player can dash into the lower vent, because with a dash it briefly lowers the character's hitbox even below what a crouch would do. So you can actually get to places you otherwise couldn't get to before. From here, it's just a simple shooting the first explosive that you see, which unblocks a spawn point with an even higher priority. And this will act like a checkpoint, and that's also that checkpoint system that I talked about earlier that I stole from another map. It's basically how that checkpoint system works. And with the explosive gone, we will now spawn here from now on. Room 2 is a fair bit larger, but it can be completed almost just as fast if you know what to do. Instead of 3 vents, we only have 2, one of which you can go through while crouching. You don't need evade for this, but it's very long and there's a timer as soon as you get into it, so you're not fast enough to go through it before the timer runs out and you die. And there's also another vent which again requires a double jump. On top of that, we have one more room, which is sort of this double split off room, where one of the sides goes downstairs and one of the sides goes upstairs. And they both have a one-way shield in front of it, so once you go through, you cannot go back. Just as with the first room, the first step is to boost your friend into the top vent. But this time, it requires the bottom player to jump as well for a little bit of extra height. Once you're in the vent, you'll find an active camo power-up, which allows you to become invisible. You'll also see that the vent continues on, but you can't reach that because there's a drop down and because the area is so tight, you can't jump high enough to reach across. So you've got the invisibility, but by itself, it's not much use. The game's physics or mechanics don't change when you're invisible or not, sadly. It just makes you harder to see in multiplayer. But you do need this power up in order to beat the second room, and I'll show you why. After picking up this active camo, the players need to split up into that double room. One player goes to the left and the other player goes to the right. And it's important that the player with the invisibility enters the right room, which will lead to the top floor. This is because on the top floor there's a bubble shield power up, which is basically this power up that protects players inside it from any incoming damage until it breaks. And there's also a golf ball behind the shield. On the bottom floor, you'll find this ramp, which you can actually jump over. But there's a trip mine behind it, which will kill you if you go into it. And even if you shoot it, it will respawn after 1 second. So there's no way you can shoot it and then quickly run across. So, how do we proceed? Well, because the player on the top floor has that active camo, he can use that to juggle the bubble shield and the active camo back and forth. In Halo, you cannot drop an armor ability once you picked one up, but if you see another one on the floor, of course you can swap it out. So with the invisibility, we can actually move the bubble shield all around the place by continuously swapping them around and walking forward. And this is how we're going to give the bubble shield to the player below. There's a little hole in the center of the floor, which the top player can throw the bubble shield through. This allows the bottom player to pick up the bubble shield, which he can then use to place it in such a way that he can block the center of the trip mine as he walks over it. And that's how the bottom player can actually advance a little bit further into the room past the trip mine. Here, the bottom player will find two things: a custom power-up and a plasma rifle. The custom power-up is this yellow bubble that gets picked up automatically and gives a couple of buffs to the player. What type of buffs it gives is completely dependent on what the creator of the map wants it to be. There's a whole bunch of settings you can change. However, what the custom power-up does is not relevant to this puzzle at all. In this case, the custom power-up is used to allow the bottom player to drop the bubble shield. I just explained how you can't drop your abilities just out of the blue and you need another ability to basically swap it around. But there's this little thing in Halo Reach where, for some reason, if you hold down the swap button while you slowly walk up to a custom power-up, your character will actually drop the ability you have as if the custom power-up was another ability. There's something in the code that makes the game think that way. I don't really know why, I just know that it works this way. So all that the bottom player has to do is hold down the swap button while he picks up the custom power-up. Now why does he need to do that? Well, it is because the top player will need the bubble shield now. And the bubble shield will not respawn as long as the bottom player still has it. So once the bubble shield is dropped, the top player needs to wait until it respawns and then pick it up. And then the top player needs to move forward and put the bubble shield kind of on this area. The bottom player can then use the plasma rifle that he found in that room to shoot the bottom of the bubble, which will cause some of the projectiles to bounce down. That's another gimmicky thing. The bubble shield actually reflects some type of projectiles, not all of them, but it does reflect the projectiles of a plasma rifle. And in this case, the projectiles are bounced into an explosive that will trigger another explosive that will push the golf ball up top out into the top room. So now you've got a golf ball in the top room. Now here's something that you need to know about the one-way shields. The one-way shields, they block players, they block weapons when you shoot them, and they block grenades, but they don't block actual objects. So after you get the golf ball, you're supposed to push it out of the room into the main room, and now both players have to kill themselves to respawn back into the main room, where you'll now have the golf ball. The golf ball may seem like an odd thing to use on this map, but it wasn't without a reason. You see, the golf ball in Halo Reach has a unique property to it when combined with the golf flag object. You see, there was this mini game that the developers and the players created where you have to hit golf balls across the map into their flags with what was essentially a gravity hammer skin. And to make it easier, because it is quite hard to hit those, Bungie added some magnetism to the golf ball itself once it got close enough to the flag. And that's why I used the golf ball here on my map. You see the drop-down vent that I talked about earlier, where the player picked up the invisibility, there's actually a lot of these golf flags forged into the wall behind it. So what you could do with the golf ball is roll it up to the shaft and it will magically begin to float up. We can use this as a bridge for one of the players to get across. All the player has to do is of course boost his strength back up in the vent and then walk back to shoot the golf ball up high enough so that the other player can get across. From here the player in the shaft goes a little bit higher up, he goes through a couple other shafts and then you will find a sprint power up. You probably guessed it, this is what we use to get through the last vent with that timer. There's one problem though once you're in the room with the sprint. You can't go back because you drop down and it's too high to go back. All that you can really see is a little hole in the floor. And just like before, the player that has to sprint has to use the invisibility to juggle the sprint out of the room for the other player to catch. This time though, there's a little bit of timing involved because the bottom player has to cross a dead pit with a gravity lift at the same time that the sprint power up is dropped. Only that way you can get to the last vent with the sprint. Once you got the sprint, you go into the vent and that is room 2 for you. The third room is rather small, but it is deceivingly complex. You have an active camo once again, which will be used for the same type of purposes. We've got a vent that's blocked with another shield and an explosive, and a vent that isn't blocked off but is too tight to crouch through. And then we also have a separate room with a mongoose. So, how do we beat this room? Well, there's actually quite a lot to it. We start off by getting the mongoose, which we have to drive up to the wall with the blue pole sticking out. And we have to sort of push it around until it starts floating. Yes, the mongoose is gonna float just like the golf ball. For some reason, this magnetism that the golf balls have is also applied to unmanned vehicles, and the mongoose is actually light enough to the point where it will start floating as well. I remember seeing this in another puzzle map and I was like, wow, I've got to steal this and use it for myself as well, because no one would ever expect this. This is actually really smart. But yeah, once the mongoose is floating, you can push it around, you can get on it and get it to the other side. And with the mongoose, you can actually get into one of the shafts, the one that you couldn't get into while crouching. This is because in Halo, once you enter a vehicle, you will not have the hitbox of the vehicle plus you. No. You will just have the hitbox of the vehicle. And because the mongoose is lower than even a crouched Spartan is, you can use the mongoose to get in these very tight areas, just like you can do it with the evade. This shaft leads to an underground area that's also mostly set underwater. Usually in Halo Reach, if you go underwater, you will die. But there is actually a way to have players live underwater and not instantly get killed. I think a lot of players know this, but you could actually get out of the Forge World map by placing a teleporter behind one of the barriers and then just going through it. There are still dead barriers that kill you if you go too far out, but there are also little gaps in between where you don't instantly die, but you're still out of the map, and it is in these areas where you're actually able to go underwater and survive. And again, I didn't find this out myself. I don't know who did, so I can't really give credit here. I'm just showing you how it's done. So that's what I use to have this underwater part of the map. Anyway, what we have to remember is that both players are in opposite teams. So it's actually quite a challenge to get both players on the same mongoose. Because once somebody is driving the mongoose and the other player tries to hop on top of it, he will automatically board it and kick the other player off. There's a way to avoid this though, and that is simply by entering the mongoose the very same moment that the other player leaves. Because during the animation that the other player leaves, you cannot go into the animation to board it. So your player will automatically hop on the back. And because there's no animation to kick somebody off that's just on the back, the other player can simply get back on, and now you have two players of the opposing team on the same mongoose. And that's what you're gonna need to do. Once you're both on it, use the mongoose to get inside the shaft, but don't drive it straight through. You can, and you'll both end up in the bottom room, but that's not how you're gonna get anywhere. What you instead need to do is both get on the mongoose, drive it backwards into the shaft slowly, up until the point where the back player is sticking out on the other side, but the driver isn't. Then the passenger simply drops down, grabs the jetpack that is in the bottom room, and then flies back up to the shaft and then gets back onto the mongoose. This is why the first player has to stay in place in the shaft with the mongoose, otherwise it's impossible for the second player to get back to the main room with the jetpack. Once you're back in the main room, you can fly up to this little edge up here where you'll find a plasma grenade that respawns over and over. It's on a 1 second cooldown. The goal is to pick 2 up, but then also give 1 to your friend, which you can do by meleeing it down. Once he has the plasma grenade, you're gonna have to do something tricky. Remember that invisibility? Well, we're gonna use that again to swap out the armor abilities. But this time we have to be fast, because one player is gonna stick the jetpack, and as he sticks the jetpack, you're going to want to swap these abilities out to throw the jetpack with the plasma grenade into a little hole through the shield so that it blows up an explosives and opens up the other shaft. Because yeah, in Halo Reach, if you stick a weapon with a plasma grenade and then quickly throw the weapon away, the grenade will actually stay stuck to the weapon and not you. And in some cases, you can use this to survive. The same counts for the jetpack, and that's also the trick we use to advance. So now we've got 2 vents open, and we sort of have to do the same thing as before. The players have to split up, one player goes to one side, the other player goes to the other side, and they both drop down. One player of course needs to do that with the mongoose because the vent on the right side is still too low for a normal player to go through. Once both players are dropped down, the player that entered through the new vent will find a spike grenade and will be completely underwater, only to find another block door with a shield and a fusion coil. The other player will find himself above the water with the mongoose and also the same one-way shield. So what do we do from here? Well, the player above has to destroy the mongoose, make it explode, and then push some of the wheels into the water. Then the player from below has to shoot the wheel of the mongoose across the little river that's basically there into the gravity lift. And this will set off a chain of reactions just as with the golf ball room. The mongoose wheel will go into the gravity lift. It will shoot out into one of the trip mines. The trip mines will explode and they will also destroy the fusion coil, allowing the bottom player to continue on. Once this is done, the bottom player will also find a jetpack down. So now both players have a jetpack. And this is required to get to the fourth room. You're now able to fly into another shaft that goes all the way to the top. Before you can enter the fourth room though, one of the players will have to stand very close to this one-way shield and let the other player punch him in the back, which will kill him, but then also push his ragdoll through the one-way shield into a trip mine, which then blows up and unlocks the next checkpoint. Because yeah, the one-way shields, again, they block players and they block projectiles, but they don't block objects and they also don't block ragdolls. The fourth room is it is by far the hardest and most complicated one. You know, you would probably say that room 5 is supposed to be the most difficult one, but when making this map I actually ran out of money to buy objects. So I kind of cancelled room 5 and then turned it into a small puzzle with more of a cinematic look to it because hey, you finally got this far, might as well give you like a decent ending. So yeah, room 4 is this big area with a shaft to the left, a hallway to the right. There's this little hole in the wall where you can look through and you'll see the trip mine. There's a drop down area in the back. There's a pit in the middle. And there's quite a bit more that you're not gonna see right away. And the deceiving part about this room is that for the first step, you have to get the mongoose from room 3. Now usually when it comes to these rooms in these type of puzzle maps, they're separated from each other. To the point where, you know, you have to kill yourself in order to advance. And you can't go back, and this is mostly done to reset the player's inventory to, you know, take away the weapons that he gathered or the abilities and allow for players to pick up those same weapons or same abilities again, but this time they have to beat another puzzle for it. It prevents them from simply grabbing the invisibility from room 2, just to name an example, to advance somewhere in room 4. But with room 4, I didn't really do this. Once you unlock room 4, you don't spawn there, you still spawn in room 3, but if you take 2 steps forward, you will instantly be teleported to room 4. It's a small difference, but it is still significant, and here's why. If one player spawns in room 3, goes through the teleporter, and then blocks the teleporter by standing on top of it, the second player can then kill himself, respawn in room 3, and walk into room 3 because the teleporter to room 4 is blocked. Doesn't sound too complicated, right? Now in room 3 you can still go into the left shaft to get the jetpack by yourself. And then with the jetpack you can just as well get the mongoose by yourself. And that's exactly what a person needs to do to get the ball rolling in room 4. So now you'd think, alright, so now the player in room 3 can go into room 4 with the mongoose. Easy enough, right? But that's, well, it's yes and no. If you go through the teleporter with the mongoose, you will actually not end up in the same place in room 4. You'll end up somewhere in room 4, but not in the same place. This is because I had 2 different exits for the teleporter. One that only allows players through, and one that only allows vehicles through. There's actually a setting for that in the Halo Reach Forge mode, which was really cool. So this teleporter has the same entry point, but 2 different exits. And the exit for the vehicles that go through happens to be on top of a trip mine. So if you go through with the mongoose, you will instantly kill yourself. Unless the other player in room 4 shoots the trip mine as you drive through. Once the trip mine is destroyed and the player goes through, you're gonna do the same thing again. You're gonna split up and help each other out the same way as that you did in all the other rooms. The guy that was still in room 4 simply has to pick up the shotgun that can be found in the middle of the map, just above the dead pit. Can be a bit tricky to get, but nothing too serious. And then the player has to drop down in the area in the back of the map. We have 1 top player and 1 bottom player, once again. At first sight, the rooms that you'll find yourself in seem very similar. You both have an active camo power up on the ground, and the top player actually also has a dice, a green dice. There's a one-way shield that prevents the top player from going down, and gravity prevents the bottom player from going up. So, how do we beat this? Well, you might think that the top player simply has to drop the jetpack down to the bottom player using the active camo, so that the bottom player can fly all the way up. And that's part of it, but not really all of it, because you also need to get the active camo that's on the bottom all the way to the top, even though on the top there's also already an active camo. And I'll show you why in just a minute. But first things first. The top player has to punch the dice that's on the top floor through the one-way shield. Again, one-way shields don't block objects. And then, after the dice is on the floor, he can use the active camo to juggle the jetpack down to the bottom player. Now, instead of going up, the bottom player has to align the dice in such a way that it's sort of like angled towards the one-way shield, and then has to juggle the camo and the jetpack on top of the dice so that the active camo is on one of these corners, somewhere like this. Then he can use the shotgun to crouch underneath the dice and shoot it at the corner so that you launch the active camo up into the room to the top player. And the top player now has the 2 camos there. Then the bottom player uses the jetpack to join him in the top room. And once he gets there, he has to kill the top player and keep juggling the active camo and the jetpack back and forth so that they don't disappear. Now it's very important that the bottom player kills the top player. And this has to do with which active camo is going to respawn. Ultimately, the goal in room 4 is to get both the active camo and the jetpack to the center of room 4 so that you can do something with it there. But you cannot juggle both the active camo and the jetpack through the gap if you only have 2 abilities. If you only have the jetpack left or only have the camo left, there's no way to drop that. Again, you cannot drop armor abilities if there's no replacement for it in Halo Reach. So the first step is to have, of course, the other player respawn and then catch the active camo through the gap like you would expect. And then, once the active camo is in the main room, the player still stuck in the top room has to go back and use the active camo that spawns on top to juggle the jetpack out. And this is why it's important that the bottom player kills the top player, so when his body disappears, the top camo will respawn. If it's the other way around and the bottom player dies, then the bottom active camo will also respawn. And the top player has no access to that. So he will be stuck with just his jetpack, unable to throw it into the main room. So, once you juggle both the jetpack and the active camo into the main room, this is where stuff gets a little bit tricky. Because instead of both players picking up one ability, one player actually has to keep both for himself and juggle them around so that they don't disappear. This is because there's one more ability that you need to get in order to beat the room. You're gonna need another evade. However, this evade is located up in a shaft very high above the map. Now you would say, well, I can use a jetpack to get that, but no, there's a one-way shield, so you actually can't. The way to get into that very high shaft is through the hallway on the right. There's a teleporter that takes you to the top of that shaft the moment you enter. But there's no way to get it back to the main room because basically if you go down, you'll die. And not just because of falling damage, because falling damage in Halo Reach is kind of unreliable. So I put a dead pit at the bottom of that shaft to make sure that every time you get to the bottom, you die. Which is why if you just walk into it, you will also die, even though you don't take any falling damage. So, how do we get this evade into the main room? Well, by doing a little bit of advanced juggling. One player has to go through the teleporter and get the evade, while the other player has to keep juggling the jetpack and the camo back and forth. Then, once the player jumps down into the shaft and falls down, the other player has to throw either the jetpack or the active camo towards the player that's falling in mid-air. And then, while the other player is mid-air, he has to hold down the swap button and throw down the evade into the main room. This is why you needed 2 abilities in the main room, so that you can throw one at your friend, which he can then use to throw the evade back at you. So, how do we get out of room 4 with this evade? Well, that's the last step. You see, the door on the right actually leads to another room, not just the shaft up high. The teleporter is there, you know, just to teleport players up top so that they can't go through right away. But you could do the same trick that you did at the start of room 4. You can have one player go through the teleporter, which means he has to go through the hallway and then get teleported, and then block the teleporter so that the other player can go through. Make sure the player with the evade goes through, because you're gonna need that. Without the evade, you have nothing to do in this room. With the evade, the player can walk up to the ghost, that's all the way in the back of the room, dash underneath it, and then look up to get a prompt to enter it from below. Now, all you need to do is get your friend into this room so that you can escape. You see, the teleporter that's sending the players up to the top of the shaft only allows players through, not vehicles. So if you're in a vehicle, you can pass freely. The problem is though, is that there's only 1 seat in the ghost. There's no 2 seats like the mongoose, so only 1 player can get through at a time, right? Not really. Remember that animation that I previously talked about, where you can kick a player off and hijack his vehicle? While that animation is going on, both players are considered to be in the vehicle, even though only one player is actually driving it. And you can use this boarding animation window to get both players through the hallway without getting teleported. That's how you get both players in that room. Then, the last step to room 4 is to destroy the ghost so that it respawns, because you cannot drive it back over the cliff. And then once it respawns, have the player enter it again with the evade, and then very carefully drive it on top of the fusion coal here. Once it's dead center on top, and this is pretty important, the other player then has to shoot the fusion coal, which will launch the ghost to the top into another teleporter to the last room. As I said earlier in the video, room 5 is very, very easy. It takes place in the outer court of the prison, and it doesn't take much to beat. You can do it in a minute, and it's fairly easy. There's just a mongoose on one side and a revenant on the other side, which you both have to get to the middle. It's a little bit tricky because there is a specific path you have to take. If you don't take a specific path, there are dead boundaries. And there's actually a dead cone man in the middle with distorted arms, and these arms are supposed to tell you the path to take, but I ran out of budget, and there was a whole thing going on with the last room. So you could brute force it, because there's like a couple of dead barriers and that's it. And the squares are huge, so I wouldn't blame anybody for simply brute forcing this. Once you got both vehicles in the middle, somebody needs to grab the flag and the plasma launcher that's also hidden at the edge of the cliff where you're gonna escape. Once a player has both of those, he has to get on the mongoose while the other player gets on the revenant. The player in the revenant has to position himself at the edge of this broken cliff and basically have the mongoose driver drive off the cliff over his vehicle and then shoot him at just the right time so that the mongoose player gets launched over the cliff towards the end of the map. Don't fuck this up, or else the mongoose player will just drive into the cliff and die. To finish up, there's one more little thing that you need to do. There's a final shield blocking you from victory, and this is why you needed the plasma launcher. There's this box here with another shield and a fusion coal, and in the middle of it there's a kill ball. Now, kill balls are exactly what they sound like. They're big balls that kill you, but if anything blocks the line of sight from the middle of the ball, it actually will not damage you. And on top of that, the outer ring is not even solid. The outer ring of the kill ball just passes through everything, and the developers, I think, did that so that it rolls better for the Indiana Jones style maps that people loved back in the day as well. I actually used this unique mechanic for the last part of my puzzle map. What I did is that I put the kill ball in between two gravity lifts so that it floats, and once it's floating, the player can smash the outer ring to get it to rotate, to get some momentum going. When it's rotating, he can use the plasma launcher to stick the outer ring, and funnily enough, the plasma balls will stay stuck to the outer ring, even if the outer ring is rotating those plasma balls through solid materials. This means if you rotate the kill ball with just the right amount of speed and then shoot a couple plasma nades on it, they will go through the wall to the other side, explode, and then destroy the last fusion coal that's in your way. From here, it's just very simple. You don't touch the kill ball, you run to freedom, and you beat the map. Only one person gets out though. Whoever was in the Revenant will be left behind. That's basically this puzzle map, and damn, this video ended up being so much longer than I expected it to be. Holy shit. I hope you're still here. It was fun for me replaying the map and even getting stuck on some parts because I forgot how to beat it after all these years. It definitely reminded me of the good old times where I'd spent 10 hours a day just playing Forge, and I really hope this video was at least interesting or entertaining. I know it's probably not something that will get a lot of views on the channel, but just like with the Rayman video that I did a while back, I'd like to have some variation in between the main content. Yeah, I just wanted to share this because the Halo Forge mode used to be a thing that I was very passionate about for a very long time. I used to be really proud about this map when I finished it because it took so much time, and I felt that I finally released like a really good puzzle map that actually had some really interesting puzzles in it, even though I didn't come up with everything myself. So yeah, that's basically this video. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you later.